Hi, I'm Casey Lueders, and this is Could Be Pretty Cool. Today, I'm talking with Greg Hemmings, a filmmaker and the founder of two production companies, Hemmings House and Hemmings Films. Like us, his company is a certified B Corp, so we're working from a similar space. Over more than 20 years, Greg has made documentaries, branded films, and even a scripted zombie series. But the project we get into today is something a little different. It's personal. It's one he's making just for himself. A while back, Greg found that the creative practices that had fueled him his whole life had quietly slipped away for a few particular reasons. Getting them back turned into an experiment that he's still running, one that took him from a jam space in New Brunswick to a mountain in Peru. We talk about what it looks like to rebuild a creative practice from the ground up and where you might start if you have lost yours. Greg, welcome to Could Be Pretty Cool. So excited to have you here, in particular because we love presenting stories about the creative entrepreneur experience that you don't really hear a lot about. And as folks are about to learn, there are several aspects of your career that are really interesting, but one in particular that we're going to chat about today. So if you wouldn't mind, could you tell us a little more about you and what it is that you do?
Well, thank you so much, Casey. I'm so honored to be here with you today. So I am a filmmaker. I went to film school back in the 90s, and through a long and meandering adventure, I ended up creating my own production company. This particular company, Hemmings House Pictures and Hemmings Films, incorporated a little bit over 20 years ago. So we've been doing this for a little while. And our company is a certified B Corp. So baked in the DNA of the company, we are trying to build economic value through purpose. And what that means to me is really honoring the triple bottom line. So making profit by being loving to people and being loving to the environment, to Mother Earth. So that's the basics of it. And so we're working within the capitalism system to allow artists who work with us to make a living and for us to support organizations, brands, companies to tell their stories in a meaningful way.
Amazing. So yes, you are our B Corp brother. We are also very much into being kind to people and being kind to the planet and helping them to be able to have sustainable lives and careers. So that's super cool. I would love to know, what are some of the projects that you're currently working on that are either dear to you, personal to you right now, that you're proud of working on for your company? Tell us a little bit about that.
We just released this epic document. It's the biggest documentary we've ever done. It's called The Berg. Unfortunately, you can't see it in the US yet, soon enough, but it's on CBC in Canada. And it's a film that we filmed in Greenland on the ice shelf. And we get to observe how an iceberg is born, which is incredible. When an iceberg calves off of the ice sheet, becomes an iceberg, travels down the North Atlantic to the east coast of Canada, off Newfoundland, where it eventually dies and turns into a whole bunch of cute little floating pieces of ice. And there's so much science that's happening as a result of icebergs. Icebergs are so critically important for our global ecosystem when it comes with water, rain, oxygen, ocean health. Everything's so connected to those polar ice caps. And as we know, with global warming, things are changing. We're getting more and more icebergs because things are melting quicker, etc. The film is gorgeous. We had divers underneath the icebergs going right up to them. Really dangerous, but super cool and beautiful cinematography. Stoked for that one. The other one I'm really proud of is this project that we did. It's a scripted show. We are by heritage documentary makers, but we've stepped into scripted entertainment recently. We did a 10-episode scripted series called Revival. And for your friends who are listening who might have Peacock as a streamer, you can watch it on Peacock. It's called Revival. It was for the Sci-Fi Channel. It's a zombie series. Very minimal to do with environmental impact or social impact, but it's really good entertainment. You got to check it out. But the project I'm doing that's feeding my soul right now the most is a personal project. It's not for any client. The only client is me, but I'm sharing it on YouTube. And it's a vulnerable project because the actual act of making this documentary series for YouTube, just the act of making it is a therapeutic approach that I'm experimenting with to see as a creative person who went through something that kind of numbed the creative spirit for a year and a half, close to 2 years. I needed to reboot it. And this particular YouTube channel is the manifestation of that. I'm doing an experiment. It's so weird because it's entertainment, it's educational. We dip our toes into the neuroscience and a bunch of, I don't even want to call them experiments, but they're demonstrations. They're experiments for me, but not for science because there's nothing really crazy new happening, but it's all very novel for me to see what's going on in my brain as I do certain things to help me get my creative muse back. And that project is called Rewiring the Muse. And it's on my brand new YouTube channel, which you can find Greg Hemmings Official. And I can talk more about that if you like. But that's the project that I'm so stoked about right now.
Absolutely. So we are team do something for yourself here. Many of us, yes, we're working to pay the bills. We have to do the shows that pay the bills. We have to do the work. But having a project as a creator that you're just like, I'm excited to do this because I like to make things is a rarity sometimes, but we are like pro that. And if you wouldn't mind, it sounds like this is a very vulnerable and personal project. Could you tell us a little bit more about the story behind it, your story behind it?
Absolutely. Ever since I was a very young child, I understood that I was a creative person. Everybody's creative. Everybody's born creative. But there's certain people, and it's probably a situation of privilege in a lot of cases, that you can express your creativity as a young child in different ways. That's probably not always the case. I'm sure there's a lot of creative people that grew up in a lot of adversity. Creativity comes out in several different ways. For me, I just happen to have a really loving upbringing of parents that encouraged me to get out and play in the woods and play music, play in bands, draw, all those things. So I really understand the privilege of that. So as I grew up going through school, I was always known as a creative kid. And it's funny when you hear teachers say that, you start to believe, you're like, oh, okay, I guess I'm a creative. I don't consider myself an artist, but I love creativity. And so all through high school, I was always involved with creative endeavors. And then I went to film school. I'm like, okay, I guess I'm going to be a creative professional. I started working in the film industry, making creative products for the world. So creativity was everything. Outside of my creative profession, I played drums in a band for many years. I play guitar, I play all the instruments. I would always have an instrument in my hand. I wrote a travel article for our newspaper every single week for 10 years. I had an impact business podcast for, I think, close to 10 years called the Boiling Point Podcast every single week for 10 years. We started that before anybody really knew what a podcast was, close to when Apple started podcasting. I put on events with a few of our B Corp friends. We did events in New York. We did events in Philly. We did events in Vancouver. And we call it the Love Economy, where we got a lot of kind of purpose-driven entrepreneurs together and just talked real things and always had a big meal together. That's a creative act. So everything that I did was creative. And then that annoying thing called COVID happened. And by nature of the isolation, there's a few things that you're going to stop doing. Like I stopped playing in a band, obviously. You're not going to put on events for that year because everybody's freaked out and all that sort of thing. So there's a couple of things that are taken away, but I was blessed not to get any COVID for the first year and a half or whatever it was. But then when the US first started opening up for conferences, I keep on picking up my 1% for the Planet mug here, showing you, your listeners can't see it, but my company is a member of 1% for the Planet. And it was the first 1% for the Planet conference. And it was in Los Angeles. And I was there and I got COVID. And I couldn't believe it. And it was at the time where Canada was very strict about letting you back into the country if you had COVID. That's a whole other adventure. I won't go into it right now, but I got home. But that started about a year and a half of dealing with symptoms of exhaustion and fatigue. And when you're exhausted for whatever reason, you're not going to pick up the guitar. You're not going to call your buddies together and jam. You're not going to feel like picking up the pen and writing. You're going to stop doing the things that fed your soul. And when you stop feeding your soul, what happens? Your soul gets hungry, but you're kind of too sick to realize it's hungry. It's a weird thing. And then because I was so busy, maybe I've just got one of those amazing scatterbrains that I've just never understood what boredom is or anything like that. Without knowing it, I stopped doing all of my creative practices. There was nothing. Of course, I was going to work. We're selling creative work as far as a video production company. But even that's not really a create. For me, I'm growing a business. And growing a business is a creative act. but it's a little different when you're selling it. It's a little different. It's still valid, very valid. But I think what I came to learn is I am missing out on the things that really fuel my soul. And that's making music, it's being together with other people, bringing on events, writing, sharing, all the things. So I was lamenting this to a friend of mine who I consider a mentor of sorts. And he's Greg, you got to just do something for yourself. And I was like, what's that mean? He said, you should make a film about something that you want to do. And I was like, that's the last thing I want to do. We make films every day. But he kept on pushing me on it. And he said, listen, I'm gonna seed a tiny little bit of money as a gift to get you started. And you're not going to say no to that, right? So it's a personal project outside my business. It's just me. I was like, okay, now I got to figure out something to do. So I was like, maybe I could do a documentary about the healing powers of music. So I used his seed money and I went to Toronto and I lined up a few really cool interviews with some music therapists, with some other really interesting people who are in different biotech aspects. And then I went to McMaster University where I met a couple of incredible neuroscientists who were studying sound and who were studying flow states. And I was blown away. I was in their research lab and it was just incredible. And at the end of the day, I didn't make a film at all about the healing powers of music. But one of those neuroscientists that I met, Lucas Klein, was studying group flow states. So he would get improvisational musicians together and put them up to EEG, put EEG caps on their heads and measure the brain waves as they would enter flow state. Now, we all understand what flow state is. You lose yourself. Your default mode does its thing. And let's say you're a guitar player. You're not thinking about the next note. It's just happening. You're not thinking of anything. Time disappears. Flow state. What happens when multiple people are experiencing flow state at the exact same time? It's amazing. What happens when you add an audience to that? And they're being measured as well. It's an organism, right? But there's a lot of cool things happening in the brain. So I said to the guy, I said, would you ever come to St. John, New Brunswick, where I'm from, which is pretty far away? I want to see if my dad band will get back together. I call it dad band because we're all a bunch of dads that make music. And we hadn't played music together since before COVID. I said, why don't you do a demonstration experiment on us? And he said, I've always wanted to go to the East Coast. Let's do it. So he came with all these EEG headsets and we did an experiment where we did 12, and it's all of our songs are originals, but we did 12 original songs in our jam space. And we found minimal flow states. We're rusty. We got these EEG caps on. It's a little weird, but whatever. It was okay. But the next part of the experiment, in between each song, each of us had a subjective survey to write out that we couldn't see what each other were writing. So the data was going to be compared to how we actually subjectively felt. Did you experience flow in that song? At what point did you experience flow? Questions like that. Then the next night we do a live show with an audience and we're all hooked up to EEG. We look ridiculous. These caps are crazy. The wires coming out of them. And we projected our brain waves live on a screen behind the stage so the whole audience could see how we were feeling and where we were getting into flow state. It was the craziest thing ever. And we got into flow state so much. What we realized later is flow state, to enter it, you need a certain level of skill and a certain level of challenge. So you can have a challenge and not have any skill. It's unlikely you're going to find flow state, or the vice versa. So we're okay musicians, okay enough to lose ourselves, like we don't have to think too much. But the challenge is we've got an audience. So if we screw up, there's no going back. But if you're in a jam space, you screw up a song, you just stop and start again. So it was really cool to see what's going on there in the brain. And for him to crunch all that data and then present it back to me, I made this little film about that whole experiment. So I was like, yay, I made this film and it was fun to do. And I directed it. I edited it. I haven't edited in a long time. And I started out editing rock and roll documentaries, a lot of live music. That's how I started my business. And it felt good. And I remembered the passion of sitting down in an edit suite, putting something together. And it was really neat because I was putting something together about my own band and it brought my guys back together. It was checking all the marks. I was starting to feel a little bit happier. I was like, I could probably start playing music again. And then I apologize for the length of the story, but then as a commercial project, my company was hired to go to Peru to do a project about the sustainable fisheries. And this was through a B Corp collaboration I had with a really cool B Corp called Council Fire out of Annapolis, Maryland. And we produced a series of short films about what the fisheries are doing for sustainability. Anyway, the camera guy I used lives in Peru. I met him in New York City because he did a really cool film with a dear friend of mine named Dr. Dennis McKenna, who is a legend in the psychedelic space. And he's like a grandfather of that space. And so I met this guy, Luis, through that experience. And then we got together for this Peru project. And Luis said he learned about my project, the little film I just made about my brain scans and all this stuff. He's, I've got a buddy who's doing that in the Sacred Valley in Cusco, but he's doing it for psychedelic, like ritual psychedelic journeys, like measuring brain waves to show people that really good things are really happening in people's brains when they have an intentional, guided psychedelic molecule experience. And he goes, do you think you'd want to try it? Because I've got the camera, and do you want to do another one of your little films? And I was like, this could be a series. Why the heck not? So we did it. And I had this most incredible, blessed opportunity to experience this molecule called wachuma, which is also known as San Pedro. It comes from a cactus similar to peyote. It's like a mescaline molecule. And it's very grounding in nature. And we went on this insane hike. It was just the most beautiful hike up the mountains. And there's hardly any oxygen up there for me because I'm a sea level guy and the altitude is really high. But the whole experience was not disassociating at all. Like, it was safe, and it was guided and intentional. And I just got reminded about the love of nature and how nature has us and we're part of nature. And I really had that sense of creation. And whether you're an atheist or believe in God, it really doesn't matter at that point. But like, I feel like no matter who you are, if you have that experience, you really appreciate whether this was created or not. The creation of all of this is incredible. And that reminder was really important in my journey of getting my creative muse back. So we did the same thing. All that data was compressed, cleaned up, and I was able to have my brain mapped and shown to me what happened the day before the trip, what happened during the apex of the trip. So at the top of the mountain, the psychedelic journey was apexing at that point. So we brain mapped me then, and then again the next day. And it was incredible to see how my brain got reordered, just as far as where things were being fired. So now I've got 2 of these short films. And I'm like, okay, we're going to show these. And I was like, I'm going to start a YouTube channel. I've got a corporate YouTube channel for my business, but not for myself. So I started a YouTube channel just under my name, under Greg Hemmings. And I started this series called Rewiring the Muse. I did another one in New York to explore sound meditation, like the healing power of sound waves. We did it again with the EEG. And we did a couple other experiments. And so right now I've got 6 episodes. 4 of them are released. I've got 2 more to release, but I'm going to keep doing them. I'm going to slow down on the experiments, on the brain, on the EEGs, because I've already proven to myself good things are happening. When you do good creative things, good things are happening in the brain. I get it. The audience gets it. But I'm going to continue exploring creativity and what can we as a creative community continue to do and support each other in to stay creative. Because once we lose the creative people, once they start going down for whatever trauma, for whatever thing that's going on, it's not good for the whole community. We need the artists to thrive. And in most cases, artists are not thriving. But what does thriving mean? It could be economic thriving. It could be mental health thriving. It could be physical health thriving. We need to support the creative people for the good of all of humanity. And I see so many beautiful artists and friends who have fallen down a tunnel and have not made it out, sadly. And that's sad. And these are the type of practices we can do to stay inspired. Let's not lose inspiration.
I mean, you shared just some really interesting ways that you as a creator have found your way back to being able to find your spark, find ways to jump back into your creative practice. And so for anyone listening who may be in a season of recovery from anything, it could be health related, it could be just, I don't know, life is life, and they're looking to get back into their own creative practice. What advice do you have for those artists, those creators who are trying to find their way back to their work and rediscover inspiration for themselves?
Yeah, I think about this all the time because I'm reflecting right now, because this is a real-time experiment that I'm going through. But if I were to boil it all together, which I think I should at some point, write it all down, because it's probably going to happen to me again sometime in my future. I'm going to want to come back. And I think you mentioned a little while ago that there might be a framework out of this, and there could very well be. I feel like one of the things that I was never good at or gave myself time to be good at is sitting in silence and giving myself the time for meditation. And I don't really have a specific meditation practice, but every morning I wake up early. I'm up at 5:15, coffee's already made, and I will sit for 10 minutes and I'll just do my version of meditation. And what was helpful for me was for me to use a bit of that time just to remember what were the things that fed my soul when I was younger. Let's say you're a drummer or a painter or something else and you've lost your muse. Well, let's not talk about that just now. What are the things that brought you so much joy when you were younger? And it might have been the awe of walking through the forest and checking out nature. It might have been actually picking up a guitar or journaling or something, but something that you haven't been doing just by nature of finding other activities. That's what I ended up doing. I really went back to the basics and said, okay, what is it that I loved doing when I was younger? And then once I started doing that, there's always joy in that first love, whatever that might be. And that beginning of being reconnected to that joy was the beginning of starting that flywheel again, the creative flywheel. And like I keep on seeing this image, and I can't tell you if I'm accurate in saying it was a Ford Model T, but way back before electric ignitions with starters in cars, there was this hand crank that you'd crank around, or these old airplanes, right? But you needed human energy to get that thing spinning. And that would get the pistons firing back and forth, and then combustion would happen. And I feel that is the same thing for create. You need that one decision, that one spark to build a little bit of momentum, but don't slow down. And it's not about putting more and more effort. It's just putting consistent effort in. And before you know it, it's going to start coming back. Now, it's not a science that I can promise, because like I say, I'm going through it right now and I'm finding wonderful results in my own creative practice. Now, I feel like I've really been able to jump back on to my creative horse, if you will, find my groove. And I feel like I have been reconnected to my creative muse. But like everything in life, it can be very delicate. And if we stop going to the gym, our muscles start to atrophy. If we stop doing our creative practices, it's possible that we might start feeling a little more dull. So I now realize that a creative practice is a daily practice, and it all starts from the very basics. I know it's a very long answer, but if you can look back into what brought you creative joy when you were younger, start there. I think that's a great place to start.
I think that's such a great answer. And actually, for me, one of my greatest joys when I was younger is when I would buy a new CD. And before I listened to the CD, I would read the whole booklet that came with it. I would read all the lyrics to each song. I would see who all the songwriters were. And then I would listen to the CD. And I think a lot of that is why I love doing this show. Before even diving into the artists and the creators' work that I interview on the show, having these conversations is like the reading the info.
The liner notes.
Yes.
Yes, I'm so with you. And this is why I miss records and I miss tapes and I miss CDs, because it was such a work of art. And I do the same thing you did. I was so excited to go through all the liner notes, and especially if you got a box set CD of the whole, the packaging was a work of art. And yeah, that's all gone now, sadly. But you can still do it if you get back into vinyl, which I'm starting to do right now.
Assuming that someone is listening to this and they're like, oh, okay, well, this is kind of little liner notes. I got to know a little bit about Greg and Greg's work. How could they then find out more about you? How could they find out more about what you've done, what you've got going on? What's the best way for them to do that?
So I've got two production companies. One's called Hemmings House, and that's hemmingshouse.com. And that company works with different companies and brands and organizations telling brand stories using film. So TV commercials, social media, videos, etc. Anything to do with video, working with brands. The other company is called Hemmings Films, and that's hemmingsfilms.com. And that company, we do our documentaries, our television series, our feature films. But then if you want to follow me more on a personal level, you can find me on my personal YouTube, which is just look up my name, Greg Hemmings Official, and you'll find it. You'll also find my other company's YouTube channel at Hemmings World. And then, of course, please do find me on LinkedIn, both Greg Hemmings and Hemmings House on LinkedIn. Love to be connected with your incredible listeners, and I'm very accessible and reachable through that, and love to connect.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for coming to chat with us today. I know a lot of people listening are going to be like, yeah, what was that thing for me that made me want to do this? And it'll help them push through whatever blocks they got going on.
Well, thanks for the patience for letting me go on and on about my stories.
That conversation with Greg has given me a lot to think about. The first is to start where the joy began. When Greg wanted to find his way back to his creative self, he didn't start with the thing that he'd lost. He went further back to what brought him joy as a kid, and then let that pull him forward. From there, it's about momentum over force. Greg compared getting unstuck to hand cranking an old engine. You're not trying to push harder and harder. You're giving it one steady turn to get things moving. Then you just have to keep them moving. And that movement is something you have to keep up. Greg talked about a creative practice, like a muscle, the kind that gets weak when you stop using it. Staying creative isn't a one-time fix. It's something you tend to a little bit every day. And finally, the last thing that stuck with me was bigger than any particular practice. Greg pointed out how other artists aren't always thriving and how much that costs all of us. Looking out for each other and helping each other stay inspired is a part of our collective work too. If you want more on rebuilding a creative practice, plus tools and ideas for the work you're making, come find us on Substack. And that brings us to the end of today's episode. Farewell, and may all of your creative endeavors flourish. Could Be Pretty Cool News is a Could Be Pretty Cool original production. Created, hosted, and executive produced by Casey Lueders. Senior producer is Liz Moore, and supervising sound editor is Trinity Jackson. Our original theme music was composed by Camille Stennis and cover art design by AJ Johnson. To learn more about Could Be Pretty Cool and discover whatever else we're up to, visit us at couldbeprettycool.substack.com. Thank you for listening.